During our romantic getaway, I uncovered the hidden truth about my partner. The sun dipped low over the rugged pine-covered hills surrounding Aspen, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold. The crisp mountain air held a chill that whispered promises of winter. Yet, the warmth from the cabin's wood stove melted into the cozy room, wrapping Emily in a fragile sense of peace. She sat at the small, rustic dining table, fingers nervously entwined around a chipped ceramic mug of lukewarm tea. The soft flicker of the fireplace cast dancing shadows over her freckled face. And though the cabin looked picturesque, a perfect retreat away from the chaos of city life, the knot tightened in her chest, unmistakably tethered to her uncertain heart. This trip was supposed to be a joyful escape, a chance to peel back layers of stress and rediscover the man she loved, Daniel, beyond the daily grind. But beneath Emily's hopeful surface bubbled a fragile web of insecurities. She had long felt that Daniel's charm and polished success dazzled others more than it truly illuminated who he was with her. Yet here she was, perched on the precipice of closing her eyes and pretending everything was fine, nursing the dream that this weekend would silence the whispers inside her. Emily's life in the small town where she worked as a barista had never offered grand vistas or boundless opportunities. Her days followed a humble rhythm: early mornings brewing coffee, late nights cleaning tables, and simple pleasures, worn-out novels, the laughter of her small group of friends. Compared to Daniel's polished world of sleek business meetings and his circle of impressive acquaintances, she often felt like a plain thread trying to weave into a shimmering tapestry. She'd caught herself countless times doubting if she truly belonged in his world, or if she was merely an illusion he tolerated out of convenience. Only a few months ago, she'd tried confiding these fears to a close friend over coffee, but the words had faltered on her tongue. The fear of sounding naive or needy held her hostage. Facing the lukewarm mug in her hands, she wondered if Daniel even knew the weight she carried silently. The cabin's door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, the scent of pine and a faint trace of cologne announcing him before she saw his figure. His tailored jacket was dusted with snowflakes that twinkled under the dim light as he shrugged it off, revealing a broad chest and the relaxed smile she so desperately wanted to believe. "Hey you," he said, his voice rich and calm. "Thought I'd find you lost in thought." Emily looked up, managing a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just thinking about the trip," she murmured. Daniel's gaze softened, but as he sank down beside her, a flicker of preoccupation crossed his usually steady demeanor. "I know things have been hectic lately. I'm glad we took this time." He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture, though familiar, felt strangely distant, as if their hands had memorized the dance, but not the warmth between them anymore. The day before, while unpacking, Emily had noticed Daniel's phone buzzing incessantly, with a message preview flashing on the lock screen. A hint of a conversation that was oddly cryptic, filled with playful but intimate emojis she hadn't seen from him when they were alone. Unease had prickled her skin. On a private impulse, she'd borrowed his unattended phone during his shower, her thumb hesitating before she swiped to open the app. Names and messages jumped out like shards, revealing a chat with a woman Emily had never heard of, full of inside jokes and shared memories that Daniel had never mentioned. A cold sting gripped her chest. Questions spiraled. Was this a harmless friendship kept secret, or a deeper betrayal? She swallowed hard, forcing herself to lock the phone and bury those thoughts deep. But now, as Daniel leaned closer, sharing half-spoken promises of nights planned and adventures ahead, Emily's mind refused to quiet. She caught herself searching his face, searching for the truth beneath the practiced charm. Was she blinded by love? Or fooling herself? Outside, the wind pressed against the cabin walls, stirring branches so the shadows flickered like restless spirits. In that amber-lit room, Emily felt more exposed than ever. A solitary figure draped in doubt, trapped between the tender hope the trip had promised and the invisible weight of secrets she feared would shatter her. Her heart trembled, a fragile bird beating wildly against an invisible cage. Then, catching sight of her own reflection in the window, a woman with eyes brimming with unspoken fears, she whispered to herself, "What am I not seeing?" Have you ever questioned the story you've built around someone you love? The silence of the night seemed to wait patiently for an answer. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the overcast sky folding the mountains into a muted canvas of shadow and light. Emily sat on the edge of the creaky bed in the cabin's single bedroom, her fingers tracing the worn fabric of her sweater as she stared at the phone resting on the dresser. It was Daniel's phone, the same one she had dared to glance at the night before, the source of both confusion and heartache. Every buzz and vibration gnawed at her sense of trust, threatening to unravel the fragile threads holding her hope together. She told herself she shouldn't spy on him, if only to protect her own dignity. But an unshakable urge clawed at her, driving a desperate need to uncover any truth she hadn't yet faced. What was he hiding? More importantly, why? Her breathing quickened when Daniel appeared in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the soft morning light filtering through the curtains. He wore his casual charm effortlessly, the kind of confident ease that made him seem untouchable and flawless to most. But to Emily, he had become an enigma, wrapped in riddles, one she was no longer sure she wanted to solve. "Morning," he said softly, stepping inside, his eyes searching hers for a flicker of warmth. "Coffee's ready," she nodded without speaking, pushing the swell of anxiety down as she stood to join him. But the weight of unspoken truths thickened the room, hanging over them like a dense fog that neither could cut through. Later, as they stepped into the brisk mountain air, the forest around them whispered secrets among the rustling leaves. Daniel's hand brushed Emily's briefly, a touch that felt mechanical rather than tender, and she recoiled slightly without realizing it. Beneath the beautiful veneer of snow-laden trees and crisp trails, an invisible barrier grew stronger. During the hike, Daniel's phone buzzed persistently in his pocket. Each time he would check it discreetly, his smile fading into something unreadable. Emily's gaze lingered, her mind spinning with the messages she imagined were waiting there. Messages that mocked her innocence, betraying the relationship she thought was theirs alone, trying to mask her swelling doubt. She forced herself to speak, but her voice barely carried over the crunch of boots on frost-bitten leaves. "Who keeps texting you this much?" Daniel's eyes flicked over, thinly veiling irritation. "It's just work stuff," he replied curtly. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Emily had long ago learned to hear the lies behind words. The hesitation, the unnatural stiffness. Deep down, she felt the sting of being pushed aside, as if her existence had become little more than a footnote in his carefully staged life. The gait of his footsteps outpaced hers, widening the physical and emotional distance between them. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, they reached a small clearing by a frozen lake. Its glassy surface held an eerie stillness, mirroring the turmoil in Emily's chest. She pulled her jacket tighter, shivering, not from the cold, but from a growing dread. Unable to contain herself any longer, she asked, her voice breaking, "Who is she?" The question hung in the frigid air, raw and exposed. Daniel's eyes sharpened, and for the first time, he dropped the mask of indifference. His jaw clenched, knuckles whitening around a loose branch. "I don't owe you explanations about every person I talk to," he snapped, his tone laced with bitterness. "Why don't you trust me?" Emily's throat tightened, her emotions erupting between despair and anger. "I trusted you," she whispered. "I thought I saw something real. But I found the messages, Daniel. I saw the pictures, the secrets you kept from me." Tears welled up, blurring the frozen horizon as the weight of betrayal crushed her. Passers-by on the trail might have seen a couple arguing, barely noting their pain, but to Emily, that clearing was a battlefield of broken promises. The revelation of Daniel's hidden life, one that she had been blind to for so long, made her feel not only humiliated, but utterly invisible, as if the love she had given was a cruel joke. The rest of the walk back was swallowed in silence, their breaths pluming white into the cold air, but Emily's heart raced with turmoil. Each step was a jarring reminder of everything she'd overlooked or denied. As they re-entered the cabin, the same walls that once held their shared laughter now echoed with the quiet devastation of a love unraveling. She stared at the door Daniel closed behind him, the lock clicking sharply, isolating her from the man she once thought she knew. At that moment, she recognized something deep within herself, an aching vulnerability wrapped in raw humiliation, but also a flicker of something else, a budding defiance. Could she find the strength to face the truth when it felt so mercilessly brutal? Have you ever felt your trust shattered in a place where you thought you were safest? Moments like these leave scars. But sometimes they are the first cracks in the walls we build around ourselves, the spaces through which real resilience can grow. What would you do if the person you loved became the source of your greatest pain? After the cold confrontation by the lake, Emily retreated into the cabin's small bedroom, shutting the door softly behind her. The walls seemed to close in, muffling the distant sounds of winter wind and the faint hum of the forest outside. She collapsed onto the narrow bed, her head sinking into the thin pillow as tears spilled unbidden down her cheeks. The room was dark, save for a sliver of muted daylight peeking through the curtains. And in that fragile light, she felt as though she were dissolving, losing pieces of herself with every heartbeat. The humiliation was suffocating, a heavy cloak draped over her spirit. She had never imagined that love could dismantle someone so completely, unraveling years of hope into a tangle of shame and self-doubt. She fought back to the moment she'd stumbled upon Daniel's phone, the way her curiosity had felt innocent, almost naive, a desperate grasp at clarity. But the discovery had shattered that small comfort, conjuring images of a man she barely recognized, someone secretive, disconnected, living a double life behind a polished facade. How had she missed the signs? Had her hope blinded her, or had she simply refused to see the cracks in their foundation? These questions gnawed relentlessly, each one a thorn piercing her fragile heart. Emily's breath hitched as memories of laughter shared and promises made flickered through her mind, bittersweet reminders of the trust now broken. The contrast between past joy and present pain was cruel, a relentless reminder of the price she paid for believing. Outside her door, muffled voices drifted. Daniel's conversation with Daniela, their longtime friend who had accompanied them on the trip. Emily strained to listen, catching snippets of gentle reassurances and subtle concern. Daniela's presence had been a comfort before, but now felt like a fragile lifeline amid the storm ripping through Emily's soul. She wondered how Daniela perceived the fracture growing between her and Daniel. Was she aware of the secret that poisoned their time together? When the door creaked softly and Daniela peeked in, Emily forced herself to wipe her tears, even managing a small, shaky smile. Daniela didn't say much. A simple squeeze of the hand was all the comfort she could offer without words. That small gesture sparked a fragile warmth, a reminder that Emily wasn't entirely alone in this dark moment. Despite the shattering pain, Emily felt a shift stirring beneath the surface, a flicker of courage that had been dormant. Buried beneath layers of doubt and fear, she lingered in the quiet until the cabin grew still and the heavy silence settled like snow over the world outside. With trembling hands, she reached for a small notebook lying on the bedside table. once a personal journal filled with dreams and hopes for the future. Opening its worn pages, she let words pour out, raw and unfiltered. She wrote of betrayal and confusion, of hurt and humiliation, but also of a deep yearning to reclaim herself from the wreckage. Writing became a balm. Articulating the storm inside gave shape to emotions too painful to voice aloud. That night, Emily lay awake, her mind racing with what-ifs and endless cycles of doubt. Could she confront Daniel? Could she command enough clarity and strength to ask the questions that clawed at her soul? The thought terrified and emboldened her all at once. Her self-esteem, once built on the foundation of their shared love, now felt fragile, teetering between despair and the possibility of renewal. She cradled those conflicting emotions, knowing full well that healing wouldn't come without pain. The loneliness was crushing, but somewhere deep in the dark, a small spark of hope glimmered. The possibility that she could rise above the humiliation and find her voice again. Have you ever faced a moment when your entire world seemed to shatter? And all you wanted was to disappear. Sometimes the most painful solitude reveals a hidden reservoir of strength, waiting quietly to be discovered. What inner courage would you summon if the foundations of your trust were broken and the only path forward was uncertain? The following morning arrived icy and pale, the sun struggling to break through heavy gray clouds that draped the mountain peaks like a shroud. Emily sat silently on the cabin's small porch, her breath billowing in white clouds as she wrapped her arms tight around herself. The weight of the last days pressed down with unbearable force. She felt hollow, as if the core of her being had been hollowed out by Daniel's duplicity and the quiet betrayals that had followed. Lingering doubts pressed her mind like relentless wind, pushing her toward a precipice she was terrified to face. Yet she knew she could no longer hide within the confines of silence. The hum of the surrounding forest seemed to echo the cacophony inside her, the oppressive uncertainty, punctuated by waves of humiliation and raw grief. Just as she was gathering the remnants of her shattered composure, the cabin door creaked open, and Daniel stepped out, eyes tired, face drawn. He avoided her gaze as he sat beside her, the air thick with unsaid words and unshed apologies. There was no flash of charm or confident grin, just an exhausted man confronted with the consequences of his own choices. For the first time, Emily saw behind the polished surface, not the man she had imagined flawless and untouchable, but someone fractured and human. Their eyes met briefly, and Daniel swallowed hard, admitting in a voice rough with regret, "I messed up, Emily. I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me, but you deserve the truth." Her heart jolted, a mixture of anger and fragile hope swirling within her. She had come to expect lies. The unexpected honesty unsettled and invited a painful reckoning. Still wrapped in layers of disappointment, she nodded slowly, encouraging him to continue. As Daniel spoke, the truth that had been hidden for years unraveled. A confession of mistakes, of moments when he failed her, and of a relationship he had kept secret, hoping it would never surface. His vulnerability was stark and unsettling, carving paths through Emily's hurt that no anger could fully block. The admission was a knife twisting deep inside, but paradoxically, it was also a lifeline, a chance to reclaim the narrative from shadow to light. In the silence that followed, Emily felt tears welling again, not just from betrayal, but from the raw clarity that emerged in the wake of that confession. She wrestled with the devastating reality. The man she loved could be so flawed that love alone might not be enough to hold them together. Yet beneath the pain, something shifted. The humiliation that had once crushed her now transformed into a stowing strength, a fierce refusal to be diminished by deceit. Daniela appeared quietly beside her, offering a steady hand and a comforting presence without words. a reminder that compassion and friendship thrived even in the darkest hours. Just when the weight of despair seemed unbearable, Daniel handed her a folded note, worn and edged with creases. "I wrote this for you," he said softly. Emily unfolded the paper with trembling fingers and found words penned with tentative sincerity. A heartfelt apology, a recognition of his failings, and a promise not for reconciliation, but for personal growth and honesty moving forward. The letter was neither a plea nor a demand, but a raw and vulnerable opening. A gesture that disrupted the cycle of silence and pain. Reading the letter, Emily felt the room tilt beneath her, the storm within slowing to a fragile calm. The unexpected act of contrition unsettled the all-too-familiar narrative of hurt and rejection, offering a glimpse of hope amidst ruin. Daniel's remorse wasn't enough to heal old wounds instantly, but it was a pivotal moment, proof that honesty could carve a path through betrayal. The other people in their circle, the friends who had witnessed their smiles and cheers, might never know the depths beneath those facades. But Emily was learning a profound, difficult truth. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage come not from perfect love, but from facing its imperfection with raw, unguarded honesty. Have you ever been brought to your lowest point, only to discover that the path forward begins with a single, unvarnished truth? In that fragile moment, everything seemed uncertain, yet the possibility of transformation flickered, waiting for courage to ignite it. What would you do if the one who hurt you showed their own brokenness and asked not for forgiveness, but for the chance to be honest? The air inside the cabin was thick with tension as Emily unfolded the letter again, her fingers trembling slightly. The neat script of Daniel's apology was a fragile thread she could pull on, yet it felt like walking a tightrope stretched over a vast canyon of pain. The weekend that had begun with promises of intimacy and renewal was now a crucible where every word, every gesture, held the weight of decisions that could transform or shatter them completely. Daniel watched her with a mixture of hope and fear, his usually confident demeanor subdued to a raw vulnerability. There was no pretense, no grand declaration, just a man willing to face the consequences of his choices. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the walls she had built around her heart beginning to quiver. That evening, as the last embers of the fire flickered low, Emily summoned the courage she hadn't known she possessed. They sat across from each other at the rustic table, the soft glow of candlelight illuminating their faces, worn from grief and tension. Daniel's eyes searched hers, silently asking for understanding, even as he braced for rejection. The moment was electric with unspoken history and fragile possibilities. "I read your letter," Emily began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Thank you for being honest. That wasn't easy." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between them. But honesty alone isn't enough to fix what's broken. Her gaze sharpened, reflecting a resolve that surprised even herself. "I deserve more than apologies. I deserve respect and the chance to heal without lies shadowing every step." Daniel nodded slowly, a flicker of sorrow and acceptance crossing his features. "I understand that now," he said quietly. "I was selfish and I hurt you deeply. I can't change the past, but I want to do better, from here on out." His voice was earnest, stripped bare of defenses. It was a confession made not for absolution, but as a promise rooted in humility and self-awareness. For the first time, Emily saw not the man she had idealized, but a flawed human striving toward redemption. The recognition was sobering, but also strangely liberating. It shifted the dynamic, transforming pain into the first step toward possible reconciliation, or at the very least, closure. The days that followed were marked by intense conversations and moments of silence that spoke volumes. Emily took time to reflect, to establish boundaries that protected her heart from further injury. She leaned on Daniela's steadfast friendship, whose quiet support grounded her when doubt threatened to overwhelm. The humiliation she had endured was still raw, but bit by bit it gave way to strength forged through vulnerability. She began to reclaim her sense of self, no longer defined solely by Daniel's betrayal, but by an emerging narrative of resilience. It wasn't an easy road. There were setbacks and nights spent battling waves of loneliness and uncertainty. But Emily's spirit, though tested, remained unbroken, but rooted deep inside her own capacity for love and forgiveness, not just toward him, but toward herself. That realization was a beacon, illuminating a path forward, a path where she could rebuild trust, whether with Daniel or within her own heart, on her own terms. Do you believe that true transformation comes from acknowledging pain and choosing to grow beyond it? Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most profound victories. Victories that belong not just to love restored, but to self-respect reclaimed. How would you rise if your trust had been broken, but your spirit refused to be defeated? Winter's grit softened as days stretched into weeks, and the raw edges of Emily's pain began to smooth, like river stones shaped by relentless currents. The Aspen Mountains, stark and unyielding, now seemed to cradle her in a quiet embrace, reflecting the transformation blooming inside her. No longer the timid woman, consumed by doubt and humiliation, Emily had found in herself a strength that had been buried beneath years of silent sacrifice and unspoken fears. Each breath she took was a quiet assertion of her worth, and every step forward a testament to her resilience. The journey had been brutal, laced with heartbreak and betrayal, but it had led her to a place of profound self-discovery and peace. Emily's mornings were no longer clouded by anxiety or suspicion, but opened with a gentle calm. She spent more time journaling, capturing the nuances of her healing and growth, savoring moments of solitude where she could reconnect with the dreams that once seemed fragile and distant. The friendships that had quietly supported her, particularly Daniela's unwavering presence, became a cherished lifeline, a reminder of human kindness in the face of adversity. Though Daniel's name still stirred pangs of loss and quiet sorrow, it no longer held the power to diminish her light. She had come to understand that love, in its truest form, began with self-respect and the courage to walk away from those who could not honor it. The cabin, once a silent witness to her deepest despair, now echoed with laughter and hope as Emily opened its doors to new possibilities. She planned small gatherings, inviting friends old and new, and reveled in the simple joy of connection untainted by past wounds. The mountains outside whispered their timeless wisdom, reminding her that seasons change, and with them, life renews. Emily no longer feared the unknown future. Instead, she embraced it as a blank canvas, ready for the colors she chose to paint. The past, painful as it was, had become a teacher rather than a prison. Her story became one of courage, etched into the soft fabric of everyday life. An inspiration quietly radiating from within. Emily realized that humiliation, while shattering, need not define a person's narrative. Instead, it could be the catalyst for rebirth, a call to embrace truth and foster compassion for oneself. In rising from the ashes of heartbreak, she had reclaimed her voice and her agency, stepping into a life shaped not by others' actions, but by her own steadfast spirit. The lesson she carried forward was universal and unyielding, that even in the darkest moments, there is light, waiting, fierce, and enduring. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button. See you in our next story.